My daughter hugged me at the airport like she was saying goodbye forever. I didn't understand why, until 3 hours later, when Oscar led me through the back gate of my own home and pulled up the floorboards in my workshop. Fake blueprints, forged contracts, $610,000 in an offshore account I never opened. All of it designed to put me in prison. And my wife was the architect. Thank you for being here. Before we go any further, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below so I know you're with me. And just so you know, this story blends real-life lessons with dramatized details for educational and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental. But the message behind it is something I believe everyone needs to hear. I should have known something was wrong the moment Tessa asked me for a ride. My daughter, 29 years old, an attorney at a top firm in San Francisco, hadn't asked me to drive her anywhere since law school. But that Sunday afternoon, she called while I was finishing drawings at my desk and said, "Dad, can you take me to the airport?" My flight got moved up. Her voice was flat, professional, like she was talking to a paralegal instead of her father. Of course I said yes. Denver in February is the kind of cold that doesn't negotiate. It gets into your lungs and stays there. Sharp and dry, tasting like iron and altitude. The sun had already dropped behind the mountains by the time I pulled onto Interstate 70, heading east toward Denver International. The highway stretched long and gray through the frozen plains. The Rockies sat behind us like a wall of shadow, their peaks buried in clouds. Tessa sat in the passenger seat staring out the window. She held her leather briefcase on her lap, both hands gripping the handles, knuckles white. I noticed, because I'd never seen her hold anything like that. I tried to start a conversation. "How's the new case going?" "Fina, you look tired, Tess. They working you too hard?" "I'm fine, Dad." Short. Mechanical. She didn't turn to look at me. Not once. I thought about asking her to stay the night. Her old room was still there. Untouched. Since she moved out 7 years ago. Same desk. Same bookshelf with the architecture models she built with me in the workshop on Saturday mornings. I'd kept them all. Even the one with the crooked roof she made when she was 8. That was the year she asked me the question I never forgot. We were in the workshop measuring lumber for a birdhouse. She stood on a step stool watching me mark the wood with a pencil. Erase it. Then mark it again. "Daddy, why do you always measure twice?" I crouched down to her level and tapped her on the nose. "Because, kiddo, one wrong line can bring down the whole building. You measure once, you might miss something. You measure twice, you know for sure." She grinned, gap-toothed and proud. "So you're like a superhero, making sure everything stays up." Something like that. She hugged me then, small arms around my neck, sawdust in her hair, and whispered, "You're the best dad ever." I blinked. The airport terminal came into focus through the windshield. Bright lights, glass walls. That little girl was gone. In her place was a woman who couldn't look me in the eye. I pulled up to the departure's curb at 9:28. Tessa unbuckled her seatbelt before I even put the car in park. "Thanks for the ride, Dad." "Wait." I turned toward her. "Tessa, are you sure everything's okay?" She paused. 1 second. Maybe 2. Her jaw tightened. I thought she might turn around, might close the door, and tell me whatever was eating her alive. I could feel the truth trembling right there at the edge. But she adjusted the strap of her briefcase and said, "I'm fine." Really. She stepped out, closed the door. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She turned around, walked back to my window, and knocked on the glass. I rolled it down. Before I could speak, she leaned in and hugged me. Hard, both arms around my neck, her face pressed into my shoulder, holding on like she was memorizing what I felt like. I could feel her heart pounding through her coat. "I love you, Dad." So softly I barely caught it. "I love you too, Tess." "Always." She pulled away. Her eyes were wet. She tried to smile, but it crumbled at the edges. Then she turned and walked through the sliding glass doors, heels clicking on the tile, briefcase clutched against her chest. She didn't look back. I sat there a long time. Engine running. Hands on the wheel. A crumpled receipt blew across the sidewalk. A plane roared overhead, lights blinking against the black Colorado sky. I tried to remember the last time Tessa and I had really talked, not the surface-level exchanges, but the kind of conversation where she actually told me what was going on. I couldn't remember. The months bled together, and suddenly my daughter was a stranger who needed a ride to the airport and couldn't say why. Her eyes were full of tears. Something was wrong. I could feel it the way you feel a crack in a foundation before you can see it. Something structural. The kind of thing that brings the whole building down. I was 4 blocks from home when my phone rang. The screen lit up the dark car. Oscar Fuentes. Oscar was my property manager. Had been for 11 years. Quiet, late 40s. The kind of person who showed up on time and never needed to be told twice. He'd never called me this late. Never called me at all. We communicated through texts and job sheets. I pulled over and answered. Oscar? His voice was low. Tight. Like he was pressing the phone against his mouth. Mr. Marsh. Come home. But don't go inside the house. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? There's something you need to see before you talk to Mrs. Marsh. Meet me at the workshop. Park down the street. Not in the driveway. His voice dropped to a whisper. And please, don't let your wife know you're here. The line went dead. I sat there. Phone pressed to my ear. Heart slamming against my ribs. Through my rearview mirror, I could see my house 4 blocks away. The porch light was on. Warm and golden. The way it had been every night for 28 years. But Oscar's words echoed in my skull. Don't let your wife know you're here. And suddenly, that warm golden light didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a warning. I parked 2 blocks down, killed the engine, and sat in the darkness. My breath fogged the windshield. Through the glass, I could see the faint glow of my porch light in the distance. Steady, familiar. A house I'd lived in for 28 years. A house that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I forced myself out of the car. The February air hit me like a wall. Dry, bitter cold. The kind that turns your ears numb in 30 seconds. I pulled my jacket tight and started walking, keeping to the shadows along the sidewalk. The neighborhood was silent. No cars. No voices. Just the low moan of wind cutting through bare branches and the crunch of frost under my shoes. I cut through the Hendersons' yard, stepping carefully over the low garden fence, and slipped into my own backyard through the side gate. The hinges groaned. I froze. Waited. Nothing. The house stayed dark on this side. Only the kitchen windows on the far end glowed with warm light. The workshop loomed ahead. A squat, cedar-sided building I'd built myself 12 years ago. Drafting tables inside, shelves of rolled blueprints, scale models, the smell of graphite and wood shavings. My sanctuary, the place where I designed every building that mattered in my career. Where Tessa had built that crooked-roofed birdhouse when she was 8. Oscar stood by the side door, hands deep in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. When he saw me, he didn't wave, didn't speak, just nodded once, and held the door open. I glanced back toward the house. Through the kitchen window, I could see Corinne moving around inside, pouring herself a glass of red wine. She looked relaxed, content, like it was just another Sunday night. My stomach turned. Oscar touched my elbow lightly, guided me inside. He closed the door behind us, quiet as a whisper, and clicked on a small work lamp clamped to the drafting table. The beam threw long shadows across the room, over the blueprint tubes, the tool racks, the shelves lined with architecture books I'd collected over 30 years. He pointed at the floor. I looked down. 3 floorboards near the back wall had been pried up. The nails sat in a neat pile beside them. The cavity underneath was shallow, maybe 18 inches deep, the kind of space you'd use to run electrical cables or store insulation. But that's not what was in there. Oscar crouched, reached inside, and pulled out a large cardboard box. He set it on the drafting table. Then he reached in again and pulled out a black nylon duffel bag. Heavy. He unzipped it. Cash. Stacks of $100 bills, rubber-banded in tight bundles. Crisp. Organized. I stared. My brain refused to connect what I was seeing with where I was standing. This was my workshop. My floor. My house. I reached in and pulled out one bundle. 50 bills. $5,000. I counted the visible stacks. 30 bundles. Maybe more underneath. $150,000. Maybe more. Sitting under my floorboards like a bomb waiting to go off. I dropped the cash like it had burned me. Oscar opened the cardboard box. Inside, a stack of documents. He pulled them out one at a time and laid them across the drafting table under the lamp. The first was a set of architectural blueprints, full construction drawings, the kind you'd submit to a city planning office. Project name across the title block: Ridgemont Valley Resort and Spa, Phase 2 expansion. I'd never heard of it, but the signature in the bottom right corner of every sheet was mine. My name, my license number, my handwriting. Except I had never drawn these plans, never touched this project, never even heard of Ridgemont Valley. I picked up the next document. A construction contract between Marsh Design Group and a company called Pinnacle Development LLC. $15 million in design and engineering fees. My signature on every page. My company letterhead. My notarized stamp. All fake. Oscar pulled out more. Invoices. Payment receipts. Wire transfer confirmations from a bank in Panama City. The account holder listed as Elliot James Marsh. Balance as of January 31st, 2025. $610,000. I stared at the number. I had never opened an offshore account. I didn't know anyone in Panama. I didn't even have a passport that had been stamped outside of Canada. This is insane, I whispered. None of this is mine. I didn't sign any of these. I know, Oscar said quietly. I picked up the blueprints again, held them under the lamp. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. The drawings were good, professional, detailed floor plans, structural sections, mechanical layouts. Whoever had produced these understood architecture. Not just the aesthetics, but the technical language, the line weights, the annotation standards, the way dimensions were placed relative to grid lines. This wasn't the work of some random forger printing fake documents. This was someone who had been trained. I set the blueprints down and looked at my own signature on the title block. Perfect. The slight rightward lean on the capital E. The way I always closed my M with a sharp downstroke. The pressure variation on the S that came from 30 years of signing contracts with the same fountain pen. Whoever forged this had studied me. Not just my name, my hand, my habits. My muscle memory transferred onto paper by someone who understood what it meant to draw. I looked at Oscar. He stood with his arms crossed, watching me, his face tight with worry. How long has this been here? I don't know. But it wasn't here last month. I replaced the baseboard heater along that wall in January. Those floorboards were solid, nails in place, nothing underneath but dust. So, someone put this here in the last 4 weeks. Oscar nodded. I looked back at the offshore bank statements. $610,000. My name. My supposed signature. Construction contracts for a project that didn't exist. Enough evidence to put me away for a decade. Embezzlement. Fraud. Money laundering. All of it wrapped in a neat package, buried under my own workshop floor, waiting for the right moment to be found. Or reported. I turned toward the window. Through the glass. Past the bare trees and the frozen garden, I could see the kitchen light still on. Corinne's shadow moving behind the curtains. She was probably finishing her wine. Maybe reading. Maybe on her phone. Maybe texting him. Oscar stepped closer. His voice dropped. "Mr. Marsh. There's something else. Something worse than the money." I looked at him. "This morning, around 8:30, I came here to pick up caulking compound for the bathroom tile at your rental on Downing Street. The workshop door was unlocked. That was strange, because you always lock it. I stepped inside and heard voices coming from below. Through the floor." He paused. Swallowed. "Your wife was down there. And a man I've never seen before. Tall. Dark hair. Expensive suit. He had a camera. A professional one. He was photographing everything. The money. The documents. The blueprints. And Mrs. Marsh was standing right beside him, pointing at things, arranging the papers." Oscar met my eyes. She was smiling. "Mr. Marsh." And she called him Damien. Smiling. The word hit me like a fist to the chest. My wife was standing in my workshop watching a stranger photograph, fake evidence designed to send me to prison. And she was smiling. I leaned against the drafting table. My legs felt like they'd been kicked out from under me. I pressed my palms flat against the surface to stop them from shaking. "Tell me everything," I said. "From the beginning." Oscar pulled a stool from the corner and sat down. He spoke slowly, carefully, like a man giving testimony. "This morning, 8:30. I came to get caulking compound for the bathroom tile at your rental on Downing Street. The workshop door was unlocked. You always lock it, Mr. Marsh. Always. So I stepped inside quietly, thinking maybe you'd come out early. That's when I heard voices coming from below, through the floorboards. A woman and a man. I recognized Mrs. Marsh immediately. The man I'd never heard before. Deep voice. Very controlled. Like someone used to giving instructions. He paused. I moved behind the shelving unit near the north wall. The one with the paint cans. There's a gap between the shelf and the floor vent. I could see down through it. Not perfectly, but enough. "What did you see?" Oscar reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. Tapped the screen. Turned it toward me. I took this through the crack. Didn't want them to know I was here. The photo was grainy, but clear enough. A man, early 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit like it had been cut specifically for his body. Dark hair slicked back, strong jawline. He stood next to Corinne, one hand resting on the small of her back. In his other hand, a professional camera with a long lens. He was smiling, confidently. The smile of a man who had done this before and knew exactly how it would end. Corinne stood beside him, looking up at his face with an expression I hadn't seen on her in years. Warmth. Admiration. An expression she used to save for me. She called him Damien, Oscar continued. He called her sweetheart. They were down there about 40 minutes. He photographed everything. She arranged the papers, made sure certain pages were visible. At one point he asked her if your fingerprints were on the documents. She said she'd handled that. My fingerprints. She'd handled that. I thought about every document Corinne had slid across the kitchen table over the past few months. Sign here, honey. And here. One more at the bottom. I'd signed without reading. Every time. Oscar stood and walked to the drafting table. He spread the forged blueprints flat under the lamp and pointed at the title block. Mr. Marsh, these were drawn in AutoCAD. Version 2019. I can tell by the line rendering, the hatching patterns, and the dimension style. It's a specific output signature that changed when Autodesk updated the software in 2020. He looked at me. You switched from AutoCAD to Revit 3 years ago. I helped you move the server rack when you upgraded. Whoever drew these hasn't used current software in at least 5 years. They're working from an old setup. Maybe even a pirated copy. I stared at the drawings. He was right. The output looked familiar, but dated. Close enough to pass a casual inspection, but not close enough to fool someone who understood the tools. How do you know all this? I asked quietly. Before I came to this country, I was a civil engineer in Bogota. Graduated from Universidad Nacional. 6 years building bridges, water treatment plants, government buildings. I used AutoCAD every day. He looked down at his hands. When I came to the United States, my degree wasn't recognized. My English was poor. I worked as a janitor for 3 years. Then a laborer. Then maintenance. I was invisible, Mr. Marsh. A man with a degree on his wall and a mop in his hands. I remembered. 11 years ago, I'd hired Oscar to patch drywall at my office on Larimer Street. He'd finished in half the time I expected, and the work was immaculate. When I complimented him, he'd said something that stuck with me. In my country, I built things that mattered. Here, I fix things that break. I just want to build again. A week later, I'd sat down with an immigration attorney. 3 months after that, Oscar had his H-1B visa. I paid for the credential evaluation, the exam fees, the licensing paperwork, not as a loan, not as charity, because I saw something in him that I recognized. A man who understood structures, who spoke the language of load-bearing walls and foundation depths the way I did. Oscar met my eyes now. 8 years ago, you didn't just give me a job. You gave me my name back. You saw a man, not a visa status. He straightened. Now it's my turn. I looked at this quiet man who had worked on my properties for over a decade without complaint. Damien had calculated everything. The money, the documents, the offshore accounts, but he hadn't planned for Oscar. He hadn't accounted for a man with an engineering degree and a debt of gratitude standing in the shadows at 8:30 on a Sunday morning. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The duffel bag, the cash, the blueprints, the USB drive, the offshore statements. Every piece of this nightmare captured frame by frame. My hands shook so badly I had to retake several shots. Mr. Marsh, what are you going to do? I can't go to the police. Not yet. If I walk into a station with this, they'll think I planted it myself. They'll think I'm covering my tracks. Then what? I looked at the photo of Damien on Oscar's phone. That confident smile. That expensive suit. The hand on my wife's back. Like he owned her. I need to find out who he is. And I need to figure out what they're planning before they finish it. Oscar nodded. Whatever you need, sir. I'm here. Why? You could walk away. Pretend you didn't see anything. Oscar was quiet. The work lamp hummed. Wind scraped a branch against the wall. Because 8 years ago, I was drowning. And you reached down and pulled me out. No questions. No conditions. He paused. You gave me back my life, Mr. Marsh. Now, I'm trying to save yours. I looked through the window one last time. The kitchen light was off. Corinne had gone upstairs. The house stood dark and silent. Just a shape of shadow among the bare trees. I can't go home tonight. I know, sir. Be careful. I squeezed his shoulder once. Then I slipped through the side door and stepped back into the frozen night. The air stung my face. My breath hung white in the dark. Somewhere behind me, my house sat quiet on its foundation. 28 years of memories locked inside those walls. Birthday mornings, Thanksgiving dinners, Tessa's first steps across the kitchen floor, and beneath the workshop I'd built with my own hands, enough evidence to erase all of it. I didn't look back. I sat in the car for 3 minutes before I could make my hands work. The steering wheel was cold. My breath came out in short, white bursts. Through the windshield, my house sat 4 blocks away. Dark now, except for the bedroom window on the 2nd floor. Corinne was up there, probably reading, probably texting him. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to her. Got caught up reviewing plans for the convention center project, staying at the office to finish up. Don't wait up. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Her reply came in 30 seconds. Okay, honey. Don't overwork yourself. Love you. Love you. 2 words she'd said to me 10,000 times over 28 years. 2 words that now felt like a blade slipped between my ribs. I typed back. Love you too. Then I threw the phone onto the passenger seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. I drove east on Interstate 70, away from Wash Park, away from Denver proper. The highway was nearly empty at this hour. Just the occasional semi-truck rumbling past, shaking my car in its wake. Snow had started falling, thin, dry flakes that dissolved on the warm windshield. The Rockies had vanished behind me, swallowed by clouds and darkness. I found what I was looking for 20 minutes later. The Mountain View Lodge, a squat 2-story building off the frontage road near Aurora. Flickering neon sign, parking lot half full of pickup trucks and sedans with out-of-state plates. The kind of place where you paid cash and nobody remembered your face. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Behind the counter, a woman in her 60s barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. Room for the night, 75. Cash or card? Cash. She slid a registration card across the counter. I wrote a fake name. James Whitmore. Handed her 420s. She gave me a key on a plastic tag. Room 18. Checkouts at 11. The room was exactly what I expected. Thin carpet. A double bed with a sunken mattress. A television bolted to the dresser. But it had a desk, a chair, and a Wi-Fi password taped to the nightstand. That was all I needed. I locked the door, dropped my bag on the bed, and opened my laptop. Oscar's photos filled the screen. The cash. The forged blueprints. The USB drive. The offshore statements. And the photo of Damien. That smug, confident smile. That perfectly tailored suit. The hand on Corinne's back. I opened a browser and started searching. Damien architect fraud. Nothing useful. A few LinkedIn profiles. A Facebook page for a guy in Tucson who definitely wasn't him. I tried variations. Damien financial crime. Damien embezzlement Denver. Damien architect Colorado. Dead ends. Whoever this man was, he'd covered his tracks. Then I remembered what Oscar had said about the blueprints. Whoever drew these hasn't used current software in at least 5 years. If Damien was connected to architecture, maybe he'd left traces in the industry. Not under his own name, under someone else's. I changed my approach. Instead of searching for Damien, I searched for the pattern. Architect, framed embezzlement, wife divorce. A dozen results loaded. Corporate scandals. Insider trading cases. Nothing that fit. I scrolled to the second page, third page. And halfway down, a headline caught my eye. Portland architect found guilty of embezzlement. Wife files for divorce. Daughter testifies. The article was from March 2019. A man named Thomas Callahan, a respected architect in Portland, Oregon, had been convicted of embezzling $180,000 from his own firm and laundering money through offshore accounts. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, hidden bank accounts, recorded conversations. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial. The jury didn't believe him. He died in prison 18 months later. The article said stroke. I kept reading. Thomas Callahan's wife, Lorraine, had filed for divorce 3 months before his arrest. She was represented by a financial consultant who also assisted during the investigation. The consultant's name was mentioned once, buried near the end of the article. Daniel Cross. Daniel Cross. I typed the name into the search bar. More results. A mention in a Salt Lake City newspaper from 2021. Another fraud case. This time, a real estate developer named Kevin Aldrich. Same pattern. Embezzlement. Offshore accounts. A wife filing for divorce. And the same name buried in the footnotes. Daniel Cross. financial consultant. My chest tightened. Kevin Aldrich had been convicted of money laundering. $400,000 through shell companies. He was sentenced to 6 years. He didn't last 6 months. The article said he was found in his cell. They called it suicide. 2 men, 2 cities, 2 wives who filed for divorce, 2 convictions built on planted evidence, and the same consultant involved in both. Daniel Cross. Damien. Different names. Same face. I could feel it in my gut, the way you feel a crack spreading through concrete. Not visible yet, but there. Structural. Getting worse. I clicked back to the Thomas Callahan article and scrolled to the bottom. A small detail I'd missed the first time. Callahan is survived by his daughter, Nina Callahan, 26. An attorney who testified during the trial, Callahan's daughter, who spoke as a prosecution witness, could not be reached for comment. His daughter testified against him. I stared at the screen. A father. A daughter who took the stand against him. A man who died alone in a cell, convicted of crimes he didn't commit, betrayed by the people he trusted most. The motel room felt too small. The walls pressed in. I closed the laptop, sat on the edge of the bed, and rubbed my face with both hands. The heater rattled beneath the window. Outside, a truck engine idled in the parking lot. Snow ticked against the glass. I pulled out my phone and called Crosby Walsh. Crosby and I had met 8 years ago when I designed the renovation for the Colorado Veterans Resource Center in Lakewood. He'd been on the advisory board, ex-Army Ranger, 2 tours in Afghanistan, now running a private cybersecurity firm out of a converted warehouse in 5 Points. We'd hit it off over blueprint reviews and bad coffee. Weekend barbecues followed. Playoff games at Coors Field. The kind of friendship where you didn't need to explain yourself. If there was anyone I could trust at 1 a.m, it was Crosby. He answered on the second ring. Voice alert, not groggy. Like he'd been awake already. Elliot. It's 1 a.m. What's wrong? Not a question. A statement. Crosby didn't waste words. Someone's trying to frame me for embezzlement and fraud. My wife is helping them. I have evidence. I have a photo. And I need your help. Silence. 2 seconds. Then, where are you? Mountain View Lodge. Aurora. Room 18. I'll be there at 6. Don't do anything until I get there. And Elliot. Yeah. Don't go home. I hung up. Set the phone on the nightstand next to the Wi-Fi password. Lay back on the sagging mattress and stared at the ceiling. A water stain spread across the plaster like a map of somewhere I'd never been. Thomas Callahan. Architect. Husband. Father. Dead at 51, in a prison cell. Stroke, they said. His daughter testified against him. Kevin Aldrich. Developer. Husband. Father. Dead at 48. Suicide, they said. 2 men. Both framed. Both destroyed. Both gone. I closed my eyes. Saw Tessa's face at the airport. The tears she tried to hide. The hug that felt like goodbye. I'm not going to be number 3. Crosby Walsh walked into the diner at 6 sharp. I'd been there since 5:30, back booth facing the door, nursing black coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the last ice age. The place was nearly empty. A couple of truckers at the counter, an old man reading a newspaper. Through the window, Red Rocks Amphitheater sat in the distance, its massive stone slabs dusted with fresh snow, glowing faintly pink in the early morning light. Crosby was shorter than people expected. 5'10", wiry build, the kind of lean you get from decades of discipline, not dieting. Salt and pepper haircut, military short, wire-rimmed glasses over sharp gray eyes that scanned the room once, cataloged everything, then settled on me. He wore a gray hoodie over a black t-shirt, jeans, boots, carried a laptop bag over one shoulder. He slid into the booth across from me. Didn't say good morning, didn't order coffee, just looked at me and said, "Talk." So I did. I told him everything. Oscar's call, the workshop, the floorboards, the cash, the forged blueprints, the offshore accounts. I showed him the photos on my phone, told him about the AutoCAD detail, told him about Corinne and Damien, about the smile, about the hand on her back. Then I showed him what I'd found online. Thomas Callahan, Kevin Aldrich, Daniel Cross. Crosby listened without interrupting. He didn't react to the money, didn't flinch at the offshore accounts. But when I showed him the photo of Damien, his eyes narrowed. He took my phone, zoomed in on the face, studied it for a long time. "This isn't amateur work," he said. "The blueprints, the forged signatures, the offshore accounts. This is someone who knows how to build a case from the inside out. He understands evidence chains. He knows what investigators look for and how to make sure they find exactly what he wants them to find." He set the phone down. "And if he's used different names in different cities, he's been doing this for years. This is a system, a business." Crosby opened his laptop, connected a small device to the USB port, transferred the photo of Damien from my phone. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed that didn't match his calm expression. Programs I'd never seen. Windows filled with code, databases, cross-reference tools. "I built this for a defense contractor," he said without looking up. Facial recognition cross-matched with public records, court filings, professional licenses, news archives, military grade. "But I keep a civilian version for private clients." He typed, clicked, scrolled. The diner sounds faded around us. Forks on plates. The hiss of a coffee machine. A trucker laughing at something on his phone. None of it reached me. I just watched Crosby work. 12 minutes later, he exhaled. Turned the screen toward me. "Here's your guy." A grid of photographs filled the screen. 5 different headshots. Same face. Different names. Different cities. Different years. Crosby pointed at each one. "Damien Locke. Denver. That's the photo Oscar took. Born 1983. But he's used at least 4 other identities over the past decade." He clicked through. "Daniel Cross. Portland, Oregon. 2018 through 2019. David Mercer. Salt Lake City, Utah. 2020 through 2021. Derek Hale. Tucson, Arizona. 2022 through 2023. Dominic Pratt. Boise, Idaho. 2017. That one's older. Might be where he started. 5 names. 5 cities." I stared at the grid. The same jawline. The same eyes. The same confident, calculating expression in every photo. Like a man posing for a portrait he was proud of. "What does he do?" I asked, even though I already knew. Crosby pulled up articles, court records, news clippings. Each one linked to a different name, but the same pattern. He targets successful professionals. Architects, developers, engineers. Men with assets, but without public profiles. Not billionaires, not celebrities. Just guys with good careers, nice houses, retirement accounts. Successful enough to be worth the effort. Quiet enough to destroy without anyone noticing. Crosby scrolled to a timeline he'd built. He works with the wives. Seduces them. Gains their trust. Gets inside the marriage. Then, he plants evidence. Forged documents. Fake accounts. Manufactured paper trails. When everything's in place, he triggers the trap. Wife files for divorce. Evidence surfaces. Husband gets arrested. Convicted. Assets get split. Damien takes his cut. And disappears. And the daughters? Crosby's jaw tightened. That's his leverage. Every case I can find, there's a daughter involved. usually a young professional. Lawyer, accountant, someone with a career to protect. He finds something on them, a mistake, a secret, something small enough to be real but big enough to end their career. Then he uses it, blackmails them into cooperating, feeding him information, sometimes testifying against their own fathers. I felt ice settle into my bones. Show me the victims. Crosby clicked. 3 profiles appeared side by side. Thomas Callahan, Portland, architect, convicted of embezzling $180,000 in 2019. Died in prison 18 months later. Official cause, stroke, age 51. Daughter Nina Callahan, attorney, testified against him at trial. Lost her law license for 2 years. He clicked again. Kevin Aldrich, Salt Lake City, real estate developer, convicted of money laundering, $400,000 through shell companies in 2021. Found dead in his cell 6 months into his sentence. Official cause, suicide, age 48. Daughter testified. Changed her name afterward. Moved out of state. One more click. Ryan Beckett, Tucson, architect, convicted of fraud and embezzlement in 2023. Currently serving 7 years at a federal facility in Florence. Age 53. Daughter coerced into providing testimony. Details sealed under a non-disclosure agreement. 3 men. All in my industry. All targeted the same way. All destroyed. How many are still alive? I asked. Crosby looked at me. His expression was the flattest I'd ever seen it. 1. And one of them is you. The diner felt too bright. Too loud. The coffee machine hissed. A plate clattered in the kitchen. I wanted to stand up, walk out, drive until I hit a state line. But I stayed, because running wouldn't change what was under my floorboards. Can you find out more about him? I asked. His real background. Where he comes from. Why he does this. Crosby nodded. Already working on it. But there's something I want to show you first. He clicked to a new screen. A public records search. A name I hadn't seen before. Damian Locke. Real name. Born Denver, Colorado, 1983. Father listed as Philip Locke. The diner went quiet. Or maybe the noise just stopped reaching me. Philip Locke. 2 words that landed like a hammer on glass. Crosby was watching me. His eyes missed nothing. Elliot. Do you know that name? I did you to answer right away. I couldn't. Because the name Philip Locke had been buried in a corner of my memory I hadn't visited in 15 years. A corner I'd bricked over and forgotten about. A corner that had just been ripped open by a man sitting across from me in a diner near Red Rocks on a Monday morning in February. Yes, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I knew his father, Philip Locke. The name hit me like a steel beam swinging loose on a construction site. I sat back in the diner booth, my coffee untouched, staring at the grid of faces on Crosby's laptop. 5 aliases. 5 cities. 1 man. But it was the father's name that cracked something open inside my chest, something I had sealed shut 15 years ago and never planned to revisit. You know him, Crosby said. Not a question. Philip Locke was my mentor. Crosby closed his laptop halfway, watching me the way a surgeon watches a patient before delivering a terminal diagnosis. Tell me everything. So I did. In 2009, I was 28 years old, fresh out of the University of Colorado's architecture program, carrying a portfolio full of ambition and absolutely zero connections. Denver's construction scene was a closed circle. Old money, old names, old handshakes. Nobody gave a young architect from a middle-class family a second glance. Then I met Philip Locke at a fundraiser for the Denver Art Museum renovation project. He was 61, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and he carried himself like a man who had built half the skyline. because he had. Philip took me under his wing. He reviewed my drawings, introduced me to contractors, recommended me for my first commercial project, a boutique hotel in Lodo that won a regional design award. For 3 years, he was the closest thing I had to a professional father. He taught me how to read a client's silence, how to negotiate with developers who thought architects were decorative, how to protect my intellectual property. Then in 2012, everything collapsed. The Colorado State Board of Architects launched an investigation into Philip's firm Lock & Ridgecrest Associates. The allegations were devastating. Falsified structural reports on 3 residential towers, bribed inspectors, substandard materials, concealed behind cosmetic finishes. One of those towers, the Ridgecrest condominiums in Aurora, had developed cracks in load-bearing walls just 18 months after completion. 200 families lived inside. I remember the day I found out. I was sitting in my new office on Larimer Street, drafting plans for a ski lodge in Vail, when the story broke on Channel 9. Philip's face filled the screen. His partner, Harold Ridgecrest, stood beside him outside the courthouse, both of them in handcuffs. I turned off the television and didn't turn it back on for a week. Philip was convicted of fraud and reckless endangerment. He received 12 years. Harold got 8. The Ridgecrest condominiums were evacuated, reinforced, and sold at a loss. Philip's license was permanently revoked. His wife left him. His assets were seized. And his son Damien was 19 years old. I never spoke to Philip again. I told Crosby. I couldn't. Everything he taught me was real, but the foundation it stood on was rotten. I built my career on lessons from a man who cut corners that could have killed people. Crosby opened his laptop again, pulling up a prison record. Philip Locke, released from Sterling Correctional Facility in 2021. Current address: a halfway house in Pueblo. No known employment. No contact with Damien on record. But that doesn't mean much. You think Damien is doing this because of what happened to his father? I think Damien watched his family get destroyed by the architecture industry, or at least that's how he sees it. Father imprisoned, mother gone, fortune seized. He grew up with nothing, and he decided the entire profession owed him a debt. Crosby tapped the screen. Look at his victims. Thomas Callahan, architect. Kevin Aldrich, developer. Ryan Beckett, architect. And now you. Every single target is in construction or design. This isn't random fraud. This is revenge. The word landed in my stomach like concrete. Revenge. Damien wasn't just stealing money or framing innocent men. He was systematically destroying architects, the way he believed architects had destroyed his father. And somehow, he had chosen me, a man Philip had personally mentored, as his next target. There's something else, Crosby said, scrolling to a scanned document. I pulled Damien's university records. He enrolled at CU Denver in 2014, architecture program, dropped out after 1 semester. His advisor's notes say he was brilliant but volatile. Guess who wrote his recommendation letter? I didn't need to guess. I already knew. Philip wrote to you from prison, Crosby continued, asking you to help his son get into the program. You agreed. He was right. In 2013, I received a handwritten letter from Sterling Correctional. Philip's handwriting was shaky, nothing like the confident strokes I remembered on blueprint margins. He asked me to write a recommendation for Damien. He said his son had talent. He said architecture could save him the way it had once saved Philip himself. Against every instinct, I wrote that letter. I never met Damien. I never followed up. I simply signed my name and mailed it, then filed the guilt under a drawer I never opened. Now that drawer was open, and everything inside was on fire. So Damien knows who I am, I said slowly. He knows I helped his father. He knows I walked away when Philip fell. And he's been planning this. For years, probably. The pattern shows escalation. Portland was sloppy. He left digital traces. Salt Lake City was cleaner. Tucson was nearly perfect. By the time he got to you, he had refined every step. The seduction of Corinne, The planted evidence, the offshore accounts, the blackmail leverage on Tessa, all of it was designed specifically for your life, your career, your vulnerabilities. I looked out the diner window. The sun was climbing over the foothills, painting the snow in shades of gold and amber. Denver looked beautiful from here, clean, sharp, geometric, the kind of city an architect dreams about. But beneath every skyline, there are buried foundations, cracked concrete, rusted rebar, secrets that the surface was never meant to reveal. What about Corinne? I asked. How deep is she in this? Crosby hesitated the first time I had seen him pause. I don't have a clean answer yet. Her phone records show contact with Damien going back 14 months, but the nature of those communications is ambiguous. She could be a co-conspirator. She could be a victim he manipulated. Or she could be somewhere in between. 14 months. That meant Corinne had been in contact with the man trying to destroy me since before Tessa's last birthday. Every dinner, every conversation, every night she lay beside me in our bed, all of it shadowed by a connection I never knew existed. I need to talk to Nina Callahan, I said. Crosby raised an eyebrow. Thomas Callahan's daughter? The one who testified against her own father in Portland? If Damien used the same playbook, she'll know things we can't find in databases. She lived through it. Her father died in prison because of Damien. I pulled out my phone. You find her address. I'll drive to Portland myself if I have to. Crosby studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll have her location by tonight. But Elliot, if you go to Portland, you go carefully. Damien has eyes we haven't identified yet. If he finds out you're retracing his steps, he won't wait for the frame to finish. He'll accelerate. I understood the risk. But I also understood something Crosby's databases couldn't quantify. The look in a daughter's eyes when she watches her father fall. Tessa had hugged me at the airport 2 days ago, and I could still feel her arms around my neck. Nina Callahan had watched her father carried out of a courtroom in handcuffs. I refused to let that become my story. I left the diner at 7:15 a.m., stepped into the frozen parking lot, and called Oscar. Don't let anyone into the workshop. Not Corinne. Not anyone. If Damien, or anyone you don't recognize, shows up at the property, you call me first, then Crosby. Oscar's voice was steady. Understood, Mr. Marsh. I already changed the padlock. And sir, I found something else in the crawl space this morning. Another envelope. I haven't opened it. My hand tightened around the phone. Don't open it. I'm coming back tonight. I didn't sleep that night. After leaving the diner, I drove back to the Mountain View Lodge, room 18, and spent 9 hours on my laptop, cross-referencing every detail Crosby had uncovered. Thomas Callahan's case file was publicly available. Portland's Multnomah County had digitized their court records in 2020. I read all 247 pages. Every line felt like reading my own future if I failed. Thomas Callahan had been a respected architect in Portland for 31 years. He designed libraries, community centers, low-income housing projects, the kind of work that earned awards but never made anyone rich. In 2018, a financial consultant named Daniel Cross approached his wife, Lorraine, through a charity gala. Within 6 months, Lorraine and Daniel were having an affair. Within 9 months, forged invoices and fraudulent contracts began appearing in Thomas's office files. His daughter, Nina, was 23 at the time, working as a paralegal at a downtown firm. Daniel blackmailed her with fabricated evidence that she had notarized illegal documents. Under pressure, Nina testified against her own father in court. Thomas was convicted in March 2019. He received 8 years for embezzlement and fraud. Lorraine filed for divorce while he was awaiting sentencing. Daniel Cross vanished from Portland 3 weeks after the verdict. Thomas suffered a massive stroke in his cell at Two Rivers Correctional Institution in October 2019. He was 64 years old. I closed my laptop and stared at the motel ceiling. The popcorn texture looked like a topographic map of somewhere I didn't want to go. At 9:47 p.m., Crosby texted me an address. Nina Callahan, 1847 S.E. Hawthorne Boulevard, Portland, Oregon. She worked at a nonprofit called Rising Foundations, providing legal aid to wrongfully convicted individuals. Of course she did. What else would you do after watching your father die in prison for crimes someone else committed? I booked a 6 a.m. flight out of Denver International. Oscar confirmed the workshop was secure, the new padlock in place, the mysterious envelope untouched in the crawl space. I told him I would be back by Wednesday evening. The flight was 2 hours and 14 minutes. I spent every second rehearsing what I would say to a woman whose life had been dismantled by the same man now dismantling mine. When the plane touched down at PDX, rain was falling in thin silver sheets across the tarmac. Portland in February felt like Denver's melancholy cousin, same cold, less altitude, more gray. I took a rideshare to Hawthorne Boulevard. Rising Foundations occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian house, painted dark green with white trim. A hand-lettered sign in the window read, "Everyone deserves a foundation that doesn't crack." The irony nearly stopped me on the sidewalk. Inside, the office smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. A young man at reception told me Nina was in a meeting, but would be available in 15 minutes. I sat beneath a wall of framed photographs. Families reunited after exonerations. Men and women holding certificates of innocence. Children hugging parents they had been told were criminals. "Mr. Marsh?" Nina Callahan stood in the hallway, holding a manila folder against her chest like a shield. She was early 30s. Dark hair pulled back. No makeup. Eyes that carried a weight. I recognized because I was beginning to carry it myself. Her handshake was firm but brief. "You called yesterday about my father's case," she said, leading me to a small office in the back. "I almost didn't agree to meet you. People contact me about my father for all kinds of reasons, and most of them aren't good ones. The man who destroyed your father's life is now targeting mine," I said. "His real name is Damian Locke. You knew him as Daniel Cross." Nina's face didn't change. She set the manila folder down, opened a desk drawer, and pulled out a photograph. It was Damian younger, shorter hair, clean-shaven jaw, but the same angular face and calculating eyes. "I've been waiting 7 years for someone to sit in that chair and say that name," she said quietly. The next 40 minutes were the most important conversation of my life. Nina walked me through every detail the court records didn't capture. Daniel Cross had spent 3 months studying Thomas Callahan before approaching Lorraine. He attended Thomas's public lectures, visited buildings Thomas had designed, even interviewed former clients under the pretense of writing a magazine profile. "He didn't just seduce my mother," Nina said. "He studied our family like a blueprint. He found every load-bearing wall and knew exactly which one to remove." "The blackmail," I said. "He used fabricated notarization records against you?" Nina nodded. "He created documents showing I had notarized fraudulent property transfers. I was a paralegal, not a notary. But the forgeries were impeccable." She paused. "He told me if I didn't cooperate, he would submit those documents to the Oregon State Bar and ensure I never practiced law." "So you testified against your father?" "I stood in a courtroom and told a judge my father had shown me suspicious financial documents." Her composure cracked just slightly, like a hairline fracture in plaster. My father looked at me from the defense table. He didn't look angry. He looked confused. That expression is the last memory I have of him alive. Something tightened behind my ribs. Tessa's face at the airport. Her smile. Her wave. The casual confidence of a 22-year-old who believed her father was untouchable. After the conviction, Daniel disappeared. Nina continued. "My mother moved to California. Never apologized. I spent 2 years in therapy before I could say my father's name without crying. Then I started Rising Foundations." She opened the manila folder. Inside were printed emails, financial records, and a handwritten timeline. "I've been investigating Daniel Cross since 2020. Partial bank records, 3 coded emails to my mother, a timeline of his movements from 2017 to 2021. She pushed the folder across the desk. Not enough for a prosecution alone, but combined with your evidence, it might be. One email line from November 2018 seized my attention. Once the foundation inspection passes, the old structure comes down. No exceptions. Foundation inspection, the trial. Old structure, Thomas Callahan's life. Nina, I have physical evidence. Cash, forged blueprints, offshore statements, a USB drive. A cybersecurity specialist running facial recognition across 5 aliases. A witness who saw Damien inside my home. She looked at me, hope and caution, and something older than both. Then you have more than my father ever did. What's your plan? I told her about the awards ceremony on February 10th. I told her about the live stream. I watched her eyes shift from cautious to fierce. I'm coming to Denver, she said. The flight back to Denver felt shorter than the one to Portland, probably because my mind was running faster than the plane. Nina Callahan's manila folder sat in my carry-on like a loaded weapon. Every turbulence bump reminded me it was there. 3 coded emails, partial bank records, a handwritten timeline spanning 4 years and 5 cities. Combined with what Oscar had found in the workshop, I was holding enough fragments to reconstruct the full architecture of Damien Locke's operation. I landed at Denver International at 4:38 p.m. on Tuesday. The Rockies stood against the horizon like a row of broken teeth, their peaks white and indifferent. I didn't go to the Mountain View Lodge. I didn't go to the office. I drove straight to the house. Oscar was waiting in the driveway, standing beside his truck with his arms crossed. He wore the same canvas jacket he always wore, the one with the frayed cuffs that Corinne had offered to replace 3 times. He never accepted. Oscar didn't like owing people things. Where is she? I asked before my car door was fully open. Mrs. Marsh left at noon. Said she was meeting a friend for lunch in Cherry Creek. Oscar's jaw tightened. She took her laptop bag. The large one. Corinne never took her laptop to lunch. That bag was big enough to hold files, documents, a small printer if needed. Whatever she was doing in Cherry Creek, it wasn't eating salad. Show me the envelope. Oscar led me through the back gate. Past the garden that Corinne had planted 3 summers ago, lavender, rosemary, sage, all of it dormant now, under a thin crust of February frost. We crossed the patio and entered the workshop through the side door. The new padlock was a heavy-duty master lock, silver and stubborn. Oscar produced the key from a chain around his neck. Inside, the workshop looked exactly as I had left it. Drafting table against the north wall. Material samples on shelves. The faint smell of cedar and graphite. But the floorboards near the east corner were still displaced from where Oscar had first discovered the duffel bag. And now, beside the opening in the crawl space, sat a plain white envelope. No name. No address. No stamp. Just a white rectangle on dusty concrete, sealed with a single strip of clear tape. I found it yesterday morning, Oscar said. Tucked between the floor joists, about 3 feet from where the duffel was. I almost missed it. The only reason I looked was because one of the boards felt loose when I was checking the padlock. I knelt down and picked up the envelope. It weighed almost nothing. I turned it over in my hands, half expecting to find a fingerprint, or a mark, or some indication of who had placed it there. Nothing. Just smooth white paper. The kind you could buy at any office supply store in America. I opened it carefully, peeling the tape with my thumbnail. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printed letter, unsigned, dated the 15th of January 2025, 3 weeks before Oscar's first discovery. The letter read, Mr. Marsh, by the time you find this, the foundation has already been poured. Your wife believes she is protecting your daughter. Your daughter believes she is protecting herself. Neither of them understands that the building they are standing in was designed to collapse. You have one advantage: you know what a condemned structure looks like. The question is whether you will evacuate before the demolition begins, or whether you will stay inside and try to reinforce walls that were never meant to hold. I am giving you this warning Because your mentor once showed me kindness I did not deserve. Consider this the last act of a debt I cannot repay. Do not trust the ceremony. Do not trust the applause. The audience will be watching, but not for the reasons you think. I read it 3 times. Then I handed it to Oscar. His face changed as his eyes moved down the page. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen from him in 17 years. Fear. This is from Damien, I said. Why would he warn you? That was the question. Damien Locke had destroyed 3 men before me. Thomas Callahan, Kevin Aldrich, Ryan Beckett. None of them received warnings. None of them found letters tucked between floor joists, offering cryptic advice about condemned structures and demolition timelines. Why was I different? Because of Philip. The letter confirmed what I had suspected since Crosby revealed Damien's identity at the diner. Damien knew that I had written his recommendation letter in 2013. He knew that his father and I had a history, and somewhere inside the machinery of his revenge, that history had created a crack, not large enough to stop him, but large enough to leak a single page of conflicted conscience. He's telling me the live stream is a trap, I said slowly. The ceremony on the 10th, he knows about it. Or he suspects I'm planning something. This line here, do not trust the ceremony. Do not trust the applause. He's warning me that the event itself is compromised. Oscar shook his head. Or he's trying to scare you away from the ceremony so you don't expose him. This could be manipulation, not mercy. He was right. Both interpretations were valid. The letter could be a genuine warning from a man wrestling with the ghost of his father's gratitude. Or it could be a strategic move, Damien planting doubt to prevent me from using the award ceremony as my platform. If I abandoned the live stream plan, Damien's frame would proceed uninterrupted. The forged blueprints, the offshore accounts, the planted cash, all of it would surface on his timeline, not mine. I photographed the letter with my phone and sent the image to Crosby with a single message. Found in the crawl space. Analyze everything, paper, printer type, language patterns. Compare to Nina's coded emails. Crosby replied in 11 seconds. On it. Don't touch the original again. Bag it. Oscar produced a gallon-sized Ziploc bag from the workshop shelf. I slid the letter inside and sealed it. Evidence. Another fragment added to the reconstruction. I sat on the workshop stool and opened Nina's manila folder beside the envelope. The coded emails from 2018 used Architectural Language Foundation inspection, old structure, delivery date. The warning letter used the same vocabulary foundation, condemned structure, demolition, reinforcing walls. The linguistic fingerprint was consistent. This was Damien's voice, filtered through the profession his father had lost and the son had weaponized. My phone buzzed. A text from Corinne. Coming home around 7. Want me to pick up dinner? Thai or Italian? I stared at the screen. My wife, the woman who had been communicating with Damien for 14 months, who had taken her laptop bag to a lunch meeting she never would have taken it to, who may or may not understand the full scope of what she was participating in, was asking me about dinner. I typed back, Thai. The usual. Then I closed the workshop door, locked the padlock, and stood in the frozen garden where my wife had planted herbs she claimed would last forever. The lavender was brown and brittle. The rosemary had survived, barely. The sage was gone entirely. Some foundations hold, some don't. The trick is knowing which is which before winter arrives. Wednesday morning, I woke at 5 a.m. in the Mountain View Lodge to 17 text messages from Crosby Walsh. The first 16 were data printer analysis, paper composition, linguistic comparison results. The 17th said, "Get to my office. Bring everything. We're building the case today." Crosby's cybersecurity firm occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse on Blake Street in Reno, Denver's River North Art District. The building had exposed brick walls, steel beams, and frosted glass partitions the kind of space that architects loved and security consultants needed. I had designed the renovation 4 years ago as a favor. Crosby never forgot favors. I arrived at 7 a.m. carrying 2 bags, one with the original evidence from the workshop, the other with Nina's manila folder. Oscar met me in the parking garage. He had driven separately, bringing the sealed envelope in its Ziploc bag and a thermos of black coffee, strong enough to dissolve concrete. Crosby was already inside, standing before 3 wall-mounted monitors displaying a web of names, dates, locations, and photographs connected by colored lines. Red for confirmed connections, yellow for suspected, blue for financial transactions. The wall looked like the nervous system of a conspiracy, which is exactly what it was. "Close the door," Crosby said without turning around. I closed it. Oscar set the thermos on a desk, cluttered with external hard drives, and pulled up a chair. The room smelled like electronics and stale takeout. "Let's start with the letter." Crosby pointed to the first monitor, where a high-resolution scan of Damien's warning letter filled the screen. The paper is standard 20-pound bond, available at any Staples or Office Depot. No watermark, no embedded fibers, nothing traceable. The printer is an HP LaserJet Pro, one of the most common office printers in North America. So the physical document is a dead end. "But the language isn't," I said. "Correct." Crosby switched to the second monitor, which displayed a side-by-side comparison of the warning letter and Nina's coded emails from 2018. Key phrases were highlighted in yellow: foundation, structure, demolition, reinforcement, inspection, collapse. The word frequency analysis showed a 94% vocabulary overlap in architectural terminology. Same author. The probability of 2 different writers independently using this specific cluster of construction metaphors in this specific pattern is negligible. Oscar leaned forward. "So Damien wrote the letter and the emails to Lorraine Callahan?" "Same linguistic fingerprint across both documents," Crosby confirmed. "Which means the letter is authentic. It came from Damien. The question remains whether it's a genuine warning or a tactical misdirection." I had spent the entire night turning that question over. Now, standing in Crosby's war room with the evidence spread across 3 monitors, I finally had an answer. "It's both." Crosby turned to face me. Oscar stopped mid-sip of his coffee. "Damien is conflicted," I continued. "His father asked me for help in 2013, and I gave it. I wrote that recommendation letter. In Damien's mind, that creates a debt. And Damien is someone who understands debt, leverage, and obligation better than anyone alive. He can't stop the operation because it's already in motion. Corinne is in too deep. The evidence is planted. The timeline is set. But he can give me a chance to survive it, and that chance is the letter." "That's a generous interpretation," Oscar said quietly. "It's an architectural interpretation. Every building has a flaw. Damien's flaw is that he can't separate his operation from his emotions about his father. And that flaw is the crack we're going to exploit." Crosby nodded slowly, then pulled up the third monitor. A calendar filled the screen, February 2025, with the 10th circled in red. "The Rocky Mountain Architecture Excellence Award Ceremony. My ceremony. 6 days," Crosby said. "Here's what we need to build before then." For the next 4 hours, the 3 of us constructed the framework for what Crosby called Operation Blueprint. The name was Oscar's suggestion, and nobody argued. First layer: evidence consolidation. Crosby organized every document into a master file, the forged blueprints from the workshop floor, the duffel bag cash totaling $152,000, the offshore Panama account statements showing $610,000 in transfers, Oscar's photographs and testimony, Nina's coded emails and timeline, the warning letter, and the facial recognition grid linking Damien's 5 aliases across 5 cities. Each piece was cataloged, time-stamped, and backed up to 3 encrypted cloud servers. Second layer. Victim testimony. Nina Callahan was flying into Denver on Friday, February 7th. She would bring her complete investigative file and was prepared to record a video statement describing how Daniel Cross had destroyed her father. Crosby had also located Ryan Beckett's wife, Margaret, in Tucson. She agreed to provide a written statement about how Derek Hale Damien's Tucson alias had framed her husband for fraud. Ryan was still serving his 7-year sentence. Third layer. The Livestream infrastructure. This was Crosby's specialty. He outlined a plan to hijack the award ceremony's audiovisual system not through hacking, but through access. I was the keynote speaker. I controlled the podium. The ceremony's production company had already granted my team access to the presentation laptop for my speech. Crosby would embed a secondary broadcast feed into the system, routing the ceremony's cameras to a live YouTube stream that would activate the moment I deviated from my prepared remarks. The audience in the room will be 300 people, Crosby said. The audience online could be thousands. The key is that Damien won't know the stream is live until it's too late to stop it. What about Corinne? Oscar asked. She'll be at the ceremony. The room went quiet. I had been avoiding this question since Monday, carrying it like a cracked foundation. I kept walking over and pretending was solid. Corinne will be seated in the front row, I said. She'll hear everything the audience hears. She'll see every document on the screen, and she'll have to make a choice in real time, deny everything or cooperate. And if she denies? Oscar pressed. Then her 14 months of phone records with Damien will answer for her. Crosby pulled up Corinne's phone records on the second monitor. 14 months of calls and texts. Some brief, some lasting, over an hour. The longest was 47 minutes on the 3rd of December 2024. The same night I had been presenting at a conference in Chicago. I remembered calling Corinne from my hotel room that evening. She had sounded tired, distracted. She said she was watching a documentary about coral reefs. She was talking to the man engineering my destruction. There's one more thing, Crosby said. He opened a new file on the first monitor, a scanned document I hadn't seen before. I pulled Damien's phone records through a contact at the carrier level. 3 days ago Sunday, the day you found the workshop evidence, Damien made a 14-minute call to a number in Pueblo, Colorado. Pueblo, where Philip Locke lived in a halfway house after his release from prison. Father and son are in contact, Crosby said. Whatever Philip knows, whatever role he plays in this, we need to find out before Monday. I stared at the Pueblo number on the screen. Philip Locke, the man who taught me how to read a blueprint. The man whose son was now using blueprints to bury me. The man who might hold the final piece of an architecture I was still learning to see. I'll go to Pueblo, I said. Tomorrow, Pueblo. Colorado sat 2 hours south of Denver on I-25, wedged between the Arkansas River and a landscape that looked like God had started sketching a desert, and then walked away. The city had a rawness to it: old steel mills, crumbling brick storefronts, churches with peeling paint. It was the kind of place where ambition went to be forgotten and the perfect place for a disgraced architect to disappear. I left Denver at 6 a.m. on Thursday. The highway was mostly empty. Just long-haul trucks and early commuters heading to Colorado Springs. By the time I reached Pueblo, the sun was a pale disk behind gray clouds, and the temperature read 29 degrees on my dashboard. The halfway house was on Mesa Avenue, a 2-story stucco building the color of dried mustard. A chain-link fence surrounded a gravel yard, where 3 plastic chairs sat around a table with no umbrella. The sign above the entrance read, Second Foundations, Transitional Housing. I wondered if Philip appreciated the irony of the name, or if it cut him every time he walked through the door. I parked across the street and sat in my car for 11 minutes. What do you say to the man who shaped your career? Whose crimes you spent 15 years pretending didn't affect you? Whose son is now methodically destroying your life? Hallmark doesn't make a card for that. At 8:14 a.m., I walked through the front entrance. A woman behind a plexiglass window buzzed me through a heavy door into a common room with linoleum floors and fluorescent lighting. Two men played dominoes at a folding table. A television murmured about weather patterns. Philip Locke sat in the far corner beside a window, reading a paperback. When he looked up and saw me, his face went through three expressions in rapid succession: recognition, confusion, and something that looked like grief. He was 76 years old now. The silver hair I remembered was thinner, almost translucent. His hands that had once drawn blueprints defining Denver's skyline, rested on the book with a slight tremor. He wore a flannel shirt, khaki pants, and slippers. He looked like a building that had been gutted and left standing out of bureaucratic obligation. "Elliot," he said. Not a question. Just a word placed carefully into the air. I sat in the empty chair across from him. The plastic was cold through my jeans. "I've followed your work," Philip said. "The Aspen Resort, the cantilevered observation deck. Exceptional." "Philip, I'm not here to talk about my work." His tremor became more pronounced. "I know why you're here. Then you know about Damien." He closed his book Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, and set it on the windowsill. "My son called me on Sunday. He said he was finishing a project in Denver. He never uses names, but he described the target a residential architect with a construction background who had received a mentorship years ago. I knew it was you, and you didn't warn me. I wrote you a letter. The workshop. The envelope in the crawl space. I had assumed Damien wrote it. The linguistic analysis showed a 94% overlap with Damien's coded emails. But what if the overlap existed because father and son shared the same architectural vocabulary, the same metaphors, the same way of seeing the world through load-bearing walls and foundation inspections? "You wrote the letter," I said. "Recalibrating everything. I asked the house manager to mail it to your home address 3 weeks ago. Oscar found it in the crawl space beneath my workshop floor." Philip frowned. "I mailed it to your home. Someone must have intercepted it." "Corinne." She had found the letter, recognized its significance, and hidden it in the crawl space, burying the warning beside the weapon. "Philip, I need to understand Damien's operation. Every detail." The old man's eyes drifted to the window. A crow landed on the chain-link fence and sat there like a black comma in a gray sentence. "Damien was 19 when I went to prison. He visited me once, exactly once. He sat across the table and told me the industry had devoured me because I was weak. He said he would never be weak. He said he would make every architect in Colorado understand what it feels like to have your foundation pulled out from under you." Philip's voice cracked. "I told him revenge was a building with no exits. He said that was fine. He didn't plan on leaving. The victims: Thomas Callahan, Kevin Aldrich, Ryan Beckett. Did you know? Not until after. Damien never tells me beforehand. He calls after each conviction, after each sentence. He describes what he did the way a contractor describes a completed project. Square footage, materials used, timeline, from groundbreaking to final inspection. His hands were shaking visibly. He calls it his portfolio, a portfolio. In architecture, your portfolio is your identity, the collection of work that defines who you are. Damien had built his identity on the systematic destruction of lives, cataloging each one with the pride a young architect feels, showing their first completed building. "The ceremony on February 10th, I said. He mentioned it. He said the final inspection was scheduled for the 10th. The audience would be present. He sounded excited the way he used to sound as a boy when I took him to construction sites. He loved watching buildings go up. Now he loves watching them come down." "Philip, I'm going to expose Damien at that ceremony. Livestream. Evidence. Victim testimony. Everything. Is there anything else I don't already have?" Philip reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hands trembled as he extended it. "Damien has a storage unit in Lakewood. Unit 37, Rocky Mountain Self-Storage on Colfax. He keeps copies of everything, every operation, every alias, every document. He told me 2 years ago. He called it his archive. I took the paper. Handwritten address. In shaky script. "Why are you helping me, Philip?" The old man looked at me, and for a moment I saw the mentor I remembered: sharp eyes, quiet authority. The man who could look at a blank lot and see a building that didn't exist yet. Then the moment passed, and he was just an old man in slippers reading Marcus Aurelius. "Because you wrote that letter for my son when I asked. And because my son became something I never designed." I called Crosby from the parking lot of the halfway house, engine running, heater blasting against the Pueblo cold. "Storage unit. Lakewood. Unit 37. Rocky Mountain Self-Storage on Colfax." I read the address from Philip's trembling handwriting. Damien keeps copies of everything. Every alias, every operation. His complete archive. Crosby was silent for 3 seconds. "How reliable is this?" "It came from his father. That's either the most reliable source we have or the most compromised." "I'll run surveillance on the facility. Meet me at the office at 3 p.m. And Elliot, don't drive past the storage place. If Damien has cameras on that unit, one pass is all it takes." I took I-25 north, avoiding Lakewood entirely. The drive back felt different. Going to Pueblo, I had been chasing a ghost. Coming back, I was carrying the ghost's confession. Philip had given me more than an address. He had given me the emotional blueprint of his son. I arrived at Crosby's office at 2:47 p.m. Oscar was already there with his thermos and a plate of gas station sandwiches nobody was eating. Nina had sent Crosby a preliminary digital package, scanned documents, audio recordings, and a 17-page statement detailing every interaction with Daniel Cross. Crosby stood before his monitors. A satellite image of Rocky Mountain Self-Storage occupied the center screen. A sprawling grid of orange-doored units, surrounded by a concrete wall and a single access gate. "I sent a drone over 90 minutes ago," Crosby said. "Unit 37 is in the northwest corner. Standard 10 by 15. Padlocked. No external cameras. But the facility has 6 security cameras covering the gate. If we drive in, we're recorded. Then we don't drive in." Crosby smiled thinly. "The facility closes to walk-ins at 9 p.m. but accepts keypad codes 24 hours. I obtained a valid code from a contact who rents Unit 12. We go tonight. On foot. Through the pedestrian entrance on the south side." Oscar raised his hand. "And the padlock?" "Bolt cutters. We photograph everything, catalog it, leave it in place. We don't remove a single document. If Damien checks and finds things missing, he'll accelerate or vanish." The plan was set for 11 p.m. That gave me 8 hours to do something I had been avoiding: go home and face my wife. I pulled into the driveway at 4:30 p.m. Corinne's car was in the garage. The house looked the same. Stone facade, cedar trim, the porch light she always turned on before sunset. She was in the kitchen chopping vegetables on the marble island. Bell peppers, onions, carrots. A pot simmered on the stove. She looked up and smiled. "You've been gone a lot this week," she said. Conversational. The tone of a woman who had been practicing normalcy for 14 months. "Busy season. The ceremony is Monday." I opened the refrigerator, pretending to look for something. "Everything okay?" Tessa called this morning. Her studio project got selected for the departmental exhibition. Pride and terror collided in my chest. Tessa's talent was real. And somewhere in Damien's archive, there was probably a file with her name on it. I ate dinner across from my wife, at the table where we had shared 23 years of meals. She talked about a charity auction for the Denver Children's Hospital. She asked if I wanted to invite colleagues to the ceremony. Every sentence was a perfectly constructed facade, load-bearing walls of normalcy concealing the rot underneath. At 10:15 p.m., I told Corinne I was going to the office to finalize my speech. She kissed my cheek. I drove to Crosby's warehouse, changed into dark clothing, and at 11 p.m., the three of us walked through the south pedestrian entrance of Rocky Mountain Self-Storage. The facility was silent. Orange doors stretched in rows beneath sodium lights that cast everything in amber. Crosby navigated with a memorized map, leading us along the east fence to the northwest corner. Unit 37 sat between Unit 36 and an empty lot where weeds pushed through cracked asphalt. Oscar handled the bolt cutters. The padlock surrendered with a sharp metallic snap. Crosby lifted the rolling door, 6 inches, just enough for us to slide underneath. Inside, the unit smelled like cardboard and stale air. Crosby clicked on a red-filtered flashlight, and the beam swept across the space. Filing cabinets. 4 of them, industrial gray, lined against the back wall. Each was labeled with a city name in black marker on white tape. Portland, Salt Lake City, Tucson, Boise, and at the end, a 5th cabinet. Denver. Crosby opened Portland first. Hanging folders organized chronologically surveillance photographs of Thomas Callahan, forged invoices, a timeline of Lorraine's seduction, phone transcripts, and a sealed envelope labeled Post-Conviction Analysis. Every document was laminated. Every folder was color-coded. Destruction preserved as craftsmanship. I opened Denver. The first folder read, Subject Profile Elliot Marsh. Inside was a 43-page dossier on my life. Education. Career. Financial records. Marriage. Tessa's university schedule. My daily routines. Oscar's immigration history. Even the brand of coffee I ordered on Larimer Street. Damien had studied me the way I studied building sites, measuring every dimension, identifying every weakness before breaking ground. The second folder read, Asset Corinne Marsh. 14 months of communication logs, a psychological profile in clinical language, and a single handwritten note in Damien's script. Willing participant. Motivated by resentment. No extraction necessary. Willing participant. Not a victim. Not manipulated. Willing. Crosby photographed every page in every cabinet. Oscar stood guard at the door. I knelt on the concrete floor, holding my wife's file. Reading the clinical dissection of a marriage, I thought I understood. We were inside for 47 minutes. We left everything as we found it. Replaced the padlock with an identical model Crosby had brought, and walked through the south entrance into the February night. Nobody spoke during the drive back. The archive had answered every remaining question except one, and that question would be answered on Monday, in front of 300 people in a live-stream camera, when Corinne Marsh sat in the front row and watched her husband dismantle the conspiracy she had helped build. Friday morning arrived with a stillness that felt like the silence before a building implodes, that brief, held-breath moment when the charges are set and the detonator is waiting for a thumb. Nina Callahan's flight landed at Denver International at 11:42 a.m. I picked her up at the arrivals curb in my truck, and she climbed in carrying a single suitcase and the same manila folder she had held against her chest in Portland. She looked different outside her office, smaller, sharper, like a blade that had been folded too many times. I brought everything, she said, buckling her seatbelt. Every document, every recording, every photograph I've collected since 2020, and I recorded my video statement last night in my apartment. 14 minutes. I didn't rehearse it. I just talked. Good. Crosby will review the technical quality and integrate it into the broadcast sequence. Elliot. She turned to face me as I merged onto Pena Boulevard. I need you to understand something. When that live stream goes live, my name becomes public. My face becomes public. Every news outlet, every podcast, every true crime channel will know that Nina Callahan testified against her own father under coercion. My mother will see it. The lawyers who prosecuted my father will see it. I've spent 7 years building a quiet life in Portland. And on Monday night, that life ends. You can still walk away. No, I can't. That's exactly the point. We drove to Crosby's office in silence after that. The city passed outside the windows strip malls, gas stations, the slow transition from suburban sprawl to the brick and steel density of downtown Denver. Nina watched it all with the focused attention of someone memorizing an unfamiliar landscape, cataloging exits and entry points the way her father might have studied a building's floor plan. Crosby had transformed his office into a production studio. The 3 wall monitors now displayed a split-screen layout: left panel for evidence documents, center panel for the live camera feed, right panel for the streaming dashboard. 2 cameras on tripods flanked a desk, where a laptop sat open to the YouTube broadcast interface. Cables ran across the floor, like exposed wiring in a renovation project. The ceremony starts at 7 p.m. Monday, Crosby explained, standing before a whiteboard covered in timeline markers. Elliot delivers his keynote at approximately 8:15. The production company has granted us access to the presentation system for his speech. At exactly 8:20, I activate the secondary feed. The ceremony's projector screen switches from Elliot's prepared slides to our evidence package, and simultaneously, the YouTube livestream goes live. How long before someone tries to shut it down? Nina asked. The venue's AV technician will need approximately 90 seconds to realize the feed has been redirected. Another 60 seconds to physically disconnect the projector. That gives us 2.5 minutes of uninterrupted screen time in the room. But the YouTube stream runs independently through a mobile hotspot even if they kill the projector. The online broadcast continues, as long as Elliot keeps talking. 2.5 minutes isn't much, Oscar said from his chair in the corner. It's enough. Crosby switched the center monitor to a preview of the evidence sequence. I've built a 12-minute package. The first 2 minutes are the highest impact materials. Damien's facial recognition grid, showing 5 aliases, the forged blueprints with the AutoCAD, 2019 timestamp, the offshore Panama account statements, and 3 photographs from the storage unit, showing the filing cabinets labeled by city. That's what the room sees before the projector goes dark. The remaining 10 minutes play exclusively online: Nina's video testimony, Margaret Beckett's written statement, Philip Locke's warning letter, and the communication logs between Corinne and Damien. I watched the preview roll. Each piece of evidence appeared on screen for exactly 8 seconds, long enough to read, short enough to maintain urgency. Crosby had arranged them in a narrative sequence that mirrored the structure of an architectural presentation. Foundation first, then framework, then the finished structure. The audience would see the evidence the way you see a building from the ground up, each layer supporting the next, until the full scope of the design became undeniable. What about Damien? I asked. Will he be at the ceremony? Crosby pulled up a guest list on the right monitor. The Rocky Mountain Architecture Excellence Awards is an invitation-only event. 300 guests, architects, developers, city officials, press. Damien Locke is not on the guest list under any of his known aliases. But that doesn't mean he won't be there. He could use a 6th identity we haven't cataloged, or he could simply watch from outside. He'll be there, Nina said quietly. He was at my father's trial. He sat in the back row of the gallery wearing a gray suit, and he watched the entire verdict without moving. He likes to see his work completed in person. The room went still. Oscar set down his coffee. Crosby uncapped a marker and wrote on the whiteboard, "Assume Damien is in the room. If he's present," Crosby continued, "he may attempt to disrupt the broadcast. Physical interruption, pulling a fire alarm, confronting Elliot on stage, creating a disturbance that forces evacuation. We need contingencies. I'll handle physical security," Oscar said. It was the first time I had heard him volunteer for anything beyond property maintenance in 17 years. I know the venue. The Denver Center for the Performing Arts, Seawell Ballroom. 3 entrances, 2 emergency exits, a service corridor behind the stage. I'll position myself at the northwest entrance with a clear sight line to the podium. Crosby nodded. Nina, you'll be backstage with me, monitoring the live stream dashboard. If the feed drops, you go live on a backup phone stream immediately. Understood. Corinne will be in the front row, I said. The room shifted. She'll be seated next to colleagues from the Denver architectural community. She doesn't know about the live stream. She doesn't know about the storage unit. She doesn't know that I know. And Tessa? Nina asked. Tessa is in school. She's not coming to the ceremony. I made sure of that last week, told her to focus on her exhibition. She argued, but she stayed. My voice cracked slightly on the last word. Whatever happens Monday night, my daughter watches it on her own terms, in her own time. Nina looked at me with an expression I was learning to read. The expression of someone who understood exactly what it meant to protect a father-daughter relationship from the blast radius of someone else's destruction. My father didn't get that choice, she said. I'm glad Tessa will. We spent the remaining hours of Friday running technical rehearsals. Crosby tested the stream connection, the camera angles, the evidence sequence timing. Nina recorded a backup copy of her testimony on a separate device. Oscar drove to the Sewell Ballroom and walked every corridor, every stairwell, every service entrance, memorizing the geometry of the space, the way he had memorized the layout of every property he had managed for me. By midnight, Operation Blueprint was fully loaded. Evidence consolidated. Testimonies recorded. Stream infrastructure tested. Security mapped. Every beam was in place. Every joint was fastened. Every load had been calculated. The building was ready. All that remained was the audience. Monday, the 10th of February 2025. The day I had been building towards since Oscar's phone call, 8 days ago. The Sewell Ballroom occupied the eastern wing of the Denver Center for the Performing Arts, modernist glass and steel, clean geometry, 300 guests seated at round tables beneath chandeliers that scattered light like fractured blueprints. The Rocky Mountain Architecture Excellence Awards. Denver's most prestigious industry event. I was its keynote speaker. Its guest of honor. Its main attraction. I arrived at 6:30 p.m. in a charcoal suit and a navy tie. Corinne had selected that morning. She had straightened the knot in the bedroom mirror, smoothed my lapels, told me she was proud. I watched her reflection and thought about the file in Damien's storage unit. Willing participant. Motivated by resentment. Oscar was positioned near the northwest entrance in a dark blazer. He looked like a guest. He was a sentinel. Crosby and Nina were backstage mobile hotspot. Backup camera. Streaming laptop on a folding table behind a curtain. Nina wore black. She looked like she was attending a funeral. Corinne sat in the front row, third seat from center. Emerald dress. Pearl earrings. Chatting with a council member's wife. She looked beautiful. She looked like a stranger. The first hour was standard welcome remarks, a video montage, 2 awards for emerging talent and sustainable design. I sat at the head table, applauding on cue, performing the role of honored architect with the same precision Corinne performed the role of supportive wife. At 8:12 p.m., the committee chair returned to the podium. It is my honor to introduce this year's recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award, a man whose designs have shaped our city for 3 decades. Please welcome Elliot Marsh. Applause. I walked to the podium. Stage lights warm on my face. The projector displayed the Aspen Resort, my cantilevered observation deck, the project Philip Locke had called exceptional from his plastic chair in Pueblo. I placed my prepared speech on the podium. 12 pages written 2 weeks ago, before Oscar's call, before the workshop, before everything. They belonged to a man who no longer existed. Thank you, I said. Thank you to the committee, to my colleagues, and to everyone who has supported my work. Standard opening. The audience settled, wine glasses lifted, attention polite but passive. I looked at Corinne. She smiled. The same smile from the mirror. The same smile from 1,000 mornings I had believed were real. I had a speech prepared tonight. 12 pages about buildings and blueprints and structures that endure. But over the past 8 days, I've learned something I never taught in any lecture. Some of the most dangerous buildings are the ones you live inside every day, without knowing they've been condemned. The room shifted. A straightened spine, a lowered glass. Corinne's smile thinned. 8, 20 PM. The projector changed. The Aspen photograph vanished. 5 headshots of Damien Locke appeared in a grid. 5 aliases, 5 cities, 1 face. Below: Portland, Salt Lake City, Tucson, Boise, Denver. Bold white text. This man has destroyed 4 families. Tonight, you will see how. 300 people realized simultaneously they were no longer at an awards ceremony. The man on this screen is Damien Locke, I said. Over 6 years, he has operated under 5 aliases, targeting architects across the western United States. His method: identify successful professionals, seduce their wives, plant forged evidence, blackmail their daughters, and engineer criminal convictions that destroy careers, families, and lives. The screen advanced. Forged blueprints, AutoCAD, 2019 timestamp, offshore Panama statements, $610,000. Oscar's photographs of the duffel bag, 8 seconds per image. The AV technician moved toward the control booth. 90 seconds. Thomas Callahan of Portland was convicted in 2019 based on planted evidence. He died in prison 7 months later. Kevin Aldrich of Salt Lake City was convicted in 2021 using the same method. He took his own life. Ryan Beckett of Tucson is serving 7 years for fraud he did not commit. Storage unit photographs 5 cabinets labeled by city. Someone in the back stood. A phone screen glowed. 60 seconds. 8 days ago, my property manager discovered $152,000 in cash, forged blueprints, and offshore statements beneath my workshop, all designed to frame me. Damien Locke's next target was me. And his accomplice. The projector went dark. The technician had pulled the feed. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. But the YouTube stream was still live. Crosby's mobile hotspot, independent of the venue's system, was broadcasting to an audience past 4,000 viewers. Nina's testimony began playing online. Her face. Her voice. 7 years of grief in 14 minutes. I leaned into the microphone. The house speakers still worked. The live stream is continuing online right now. Every document, every photograph, every testimony is being broadcast to thousands of viewers. The evidence is public. It cannot be deleted. It cannot be buried beneath a workshop floor. I looked at Corinne. Her face was white. Her hands gripped the table. The emerald dress, the pearl earrings, the practiced smile stripped away like plaster crumbling off a wall to reveal rotten framing, then movement in the corner of my vision. Oscar had shifted from his post, his body angled toward the back of the room, his hand raised slightly a signal. I followed his sightline. 3rd row from the back. Aisle seat. Gray suit. Angular face. Perfectly still. Damien Locke sat with his hands folded in his lap, watching me with an expression that held no surprise, no anger, no fear, only the calm attention of an architect reviewing a structure he had not designed. Our eyes met across 300 people. Nina had described this in Portland. The man who watches his work. Completed, in person. He had sat in the gallery during her father's trial without moving, wearing that same gray suit, observing the destruction he had engineered with the satisfaction of a contractor watching a controlled demolition. But tonight was different. Tonight, the building coming down was his. Damien held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket with one hand, and walked toward the rear exit, with the unhurried stride of a man leaving a performance before the final act. Oscar was already moving. Oscar intercepted Damien before he reached the rear exit. I couldn't see exactly what happened from the podium, only the shift of bodies near the back of the ballroom, the sudden turn of heads, and Oscar's broad frame stepping into the aisle to block the path of a man in a gray suit, who moved with the calm precision of someone accustomed to leaving rooms before consequences arrived. But tonight, the door was closed. 2 Denver police officers had entered the ballroom through the service corridor 30 seconds earlier. Crosby had called them at 8:19, 1 minute before the live stream activated, providing a detailed summary of the evidence and the suspect's location. The officers weren't here because of my speech. They were here because Crosby had spent the weekend assembling a formal complaint with the Denver District Attorney's Office, supported by the storage unit photographs, Nina's testimony, and the financial records linking Damien's 5 aliases to 3 convictions and 1 death. Damien stopped walking when he saw the officers. He didn't run. He didn't raise his voice. He turned and looked back at me across the length of the ballroom. 300 people between us, all of them on their feet now. Phones raised, the murmur of confusion building into something louder and more electric. His expression hadn't changed. That same measured calm. That same architectural assessment. Then one of the officers spoke his name, and the calm fractured just slightly, just for a moment, like a hairline crack running through a load-bearing column. He blinked. His jaw tightened. His hands, which had been folded so neatly in the audience, now hung at his sides with fingers slightly curled. Oscar stood 2 feet behind him, blocking the retreat. The officers approached from the front. Damien Locke was arrested at 8:27 p.m. in the Sewell Ballroom. Surrounded by the architecture community he had spent 6 years systematically destroying, the ballroom erupted. Not into panic, into the loud, disorganized energy of people who had just witnessed something they would spend weeks trying to process. Committee members rushed toward the stage. Journalists who had been covering the awards ceremony were now covering something entirely different. Phone screens recorded from every angle. The YouTube stream had crossed 12,000 viewers. I stepped away from the podium and walked down the stage steps into the audience. People reached for me, handshakes, shoulder grabs, questions shouted over the noise. I moved through them without stopping. My eyes fixed on the front row. Corinne hadn't moved. She sat in her chair, hands flat on the table, staring at the dark projector screen, as if the evidence were still displayed there. The women on either side of her had shifted away a physical gap that said more than any accusation. The emerald dress looked wrong now, too bright for the wreckage surrounding it. Her face held an expression I had never seen in 23 years of marriage, the look of someone watching a building collapse and realizing they were still inside. I stopped in front of her table. The noise of the ballroom continued behind me, but between us, there was silence. The same silence that exists in the seconds after a demolition charge fires and before the dust settles. "Elliot," she said. Her voice was thin and airless. "The police will want to speak with you," I said. "Crosby has your phone records. 14 months. Every call. Every text. And Damien's file on you from the storage unit, willing participant. Motivated by resentment. No extraction necessary." I paused. Those are his words. Corinne. Not mine. Her eyes closed. When they opened, there were no tears. Just a flatness that reminded me of Philip Locke's expression in The Halfway House, the look of someone who had been caught inside their own failed design. "I didn't know about the others," she whispered. "Thomas Callahan. Kevin Aldrich. I didn't know anyone died. But you knew about me." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. A plainclothes detective approached our table and asked Corinne to accompany him to a separate room for questioning. She stood slowly, smoothing her dress with hands that trembled for the first time since I had known her. She didn't look at me as she walked away. The pearl earrings caught the light one last time before she disappeared through a side door flanked by 2 officers. I stood alone at the front of the ballroom. The noise continued, voices, footsteps, the artificial urgency of breaking news, but I was somewhere else entirely. Standing in the wreckage of a structure I had spent 23 years building, examining the debris for anything worth salvaging. Nina appeared beside me. She had come from backstage, her phone still in her hand, the streaming dashboard showing 18,400 concurrent viewers. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "It's done," she said. The stream captured everything. The evidence, your speech, the arrest. It's already being shared. News stations are calling Crosby's phone. The DA's office has issued a statement confirming they're reviewing the case files for all 5 cities. Ryan Beckett, I said. Tucson. His wife Margaret is watching the stream right now. She called Crosby 4 minutes ago. She was crying so hard she couldn't speak. Nina's voice wavered. Her husband has been in prison for 2 years for something he didn't do. Tonight might be the beginning of getting him out. I nodded. The weight of that one man still in a cell. One man dead of a stroke. One man dead by his own hand, settled onto my shoulders, with a gravity that no architectural calculation could quantify. Oscar found me 10 minutes later. He was breathing hard, his blazer askew, a red mark on his right forearm. Damien resisted at the door, Oscar said. Not much. Enough to earn an additional charge. He's in custody. Transport is outside. Did he say anything? Oscar hesitated. One thing. When the officers put him in the car, he looked at me and said, "Tell Marsh." The building was already finished. He just doesn't know which one. The words hung in the air between us. Crosby appeared from backstage, laptop under his arm, face tight with controlled adrenaline. Elliot. The stream is at 26,000 viewers and climbing. CNN, local affiliates, and 3 podcasts have requested interviews. The DA wants to meet tomorrow morning at 9. And he paused, checking his phone. Tessa is calling you. My daughter's name on the screen. I stepped away from the noise, found a quiet corner near the service corridor, and answered, Dad? Her voice was small and frightened, the voice of a child, not a 22-year-old architecture student. Dad, what's happening? Someone sent me a link. There's a video of you on stage and police and Dad. Where's Mom? I closed my eyes. The service corridor smelled like industrial cleaner and cold concrete. Somewhere behind me, 300 people were still processing what they had witnessed. Somewhere in a police transport, Damien Locke was sitting in handcuffs. Somewhere in a questioning room, my wife was deciding how much truth she could afford. And here, in a quiet corner of the building I had always admired for its clean geometry, my daughter was asking me a question I didn't know how to answer. Tessa, I need you to listen carefully. I'm safe. Everything is going to be okay. But I need to tell you some things. And they're going to be hard to hear. I told Tessa everything. Not on the phone, I couldn't do that to her through a speaker and a satellite signal. I told her I was safe, told her not to watch any more videos, told her I would call her back within an hour. Then I hung up, walked back into the ballroom, found Crosby, and said 3 words. Get me to Boulder. Crosby drove. Oscar stayed at the venue to coordinate with police and manage the flood of journalists now surrounding the building, like water around a sinking foundation. Nina remained backstage, monitoring the stream that had crossed 34,000 viewers and showed no signs of slowing. The internet had found the story, and the internet does not sleep. We reached Tessa's apartment near the University of Colorado campus at 10:47 p.m. She opened the door before I knocked. Her eyes were swollen. Her laptop open on the couch behind her, showing a paused frame of my face at the podium. She had watched the entire stream. Dead. 1 word. 2000. 1. Then she was in my arms, shaking, and I held my daughter the way I had held her when she was 5 years old and afraid of thunderstorms, tight enough to absorb the trembling, loose enough to let her breathe. Crosby waited in the car. This was not his architecture to navigate. We sat on her couch, and I told her everything from the beginning. Oscar's phone call, the workshop, the duffel bag, the cash, the forged blueprints, Damien Locke, and his 5 aliases. The victims: Thomas Callahan dead in prison, Kevin Aldrich dead by his own hand, Ryan Beckett still serving a sentence for crimes fabricated by a man who cataloged human destruction in filing cabinets. I told her about Nina Callahan, who had testified against her own father under blackmail and spent 7 years rebuilding herself from the wreckage. I told her about Philip Locke in his halfway house in Pueblo, reading Marcus Aurelius and waiting for the consequences of a son he couldn't control. And then I told her about Corinne. Tessa didn't cry when I described the phone records' 14 months of communication with Damien. She didn't cry when I recounted the storage unit file labeled Asset Corinne Marsh and the handwritten note about willing participation. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap in a posture that reminded me, with a pain I wasn't prepared for, of Damien sitting in the ballroom audience. "Did she know they were going to frame you?" Tessa asked. Her voice was flat, drained of the warmth I had always associated with my daughter. She told me she didn't know about the other victims. She didn't deny knowing about me. That's not an answer. No, it's not. Tessa stood and walked to her kitchen window. Her apartment overlooked a courtyard where bare trees stood like structural columns stripped of their cladding. She pressed her forehead against the glass. "The night before I flew back to school," she said quietly, "Mom and I had dinner together. Just the two of us. You were working late. She asked me about my studio project, the adaptive reuse proposal for the old flour mill. She listened for an hour. She gave me notes. Good notes." Tessa's breath fogged the window. Was any of that real? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't hurt her. So I gave her the only honest one I had. "I don't know, Tessa. The parts of your mother that love you might be separate from the parts that did this. People aren't buildings. You can't always see which walls are load-bearing and which ones are decorative." She turned from the window. "Don't use architecture metaphors right now, Dad. Please." "Sorry." She almost smiled. Almost. Then the weight returned, and she sat back down on the couch and pulled a blanket over her knees. She looked young, younger than 22. Younger than the confident woman who had hugged me at the airport 9 days ago. Damage does that. It strips years off a person and adds them simultaneously. "What happens now?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning I meet with the district attorney at 9. They're reviewing Damien's cases across all 5 cities. Nina Callahan and Margaret Beckett are cooperating as witnesses. The Livestream evidence is being cataloged as part of the formal complaint Crosby filed Friday. And Mom? She's being questioned tonight. The DA will determine whether she's charged as a co-conspirator or offered a cooperation agreement based on what she discloses. Will she go to prison? The question landed in the room like a dropped beam. I had asked myself the same thing 100 times in the past 8 days, running scenarios the way I run structural calculations, testing loads, measuring tolerances, predicting where the breaks would come. "I don't know," I said. "It depends on how much she knew, how much she participated, and how much she's willing to tell the truth about." Tessa pulled the blanket tighter. "I want to come to the DA meeting tomorrow. I'm not asking permission, Dad. I'm 22 years old, and my mother may have helped a con artist frame my father for a crime that put 3 other men in prison and killed 2 of them. I have a right to be in that room." She was right. And in that moment, I saw something in her eyes that I recognized not from Corinne, not from myself, but from Nina Callahan. The same fierce, unwavering clarity, the same refusal to look away from wreckage, the same decision to walk into the debris rather than around it. "Okay," I said. "We leave at 7. I stayed in Tessa's apartment that night. She gave me the couch and a pillow that smelled like lavender, the same herb. Corinne grew in our garden, the one that had gone brown and brittle under February frost. I lay awake listening to the campus sounds outside, distant laughter. A car door. The hum of heating systems keeping old buildings warm through the night. My phone showed 147 unread messages. Emails from journalists, colleagues, former clients. A text from Oscar. Venue cleared. Evidence secured. Police have full copies. I'm at the house. Corinne hasn't returned. A text from Nina. Stream peaked at 41,000. Crosby is archiving everything. Thomas would have been grateful. Good night, Elliot. A text from an unknown number. You think the demolition is over. It hasn't started. D. I stared at those 12 words until the screen went dark. Then I set the phone face down on the coffee table and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, the formal process would begin: depositions, evidence review, charges filed, lawyers retained. The architecture of justice is slow and deliberate, built permit by permit, hearing by hearing. But Damien's message told me something the legal system couldn't. He still had a move left. The building wasn't finished. Not yet. The Denver District Attorney's Office occupied the 4th floor of the Lindsay Flanagan Courthouse on Colfax Avenue. A building I had always found architecturally uninspired, all right angles and beige stone, designed to convey authority without imagination. But on Tuesday morning, February 11th, walking through its metal detectors with my daughter beside me, I understood that justice doesn't need a beautiful building. It just needs walls that don't lie. Tessa had slept 3 hours. I had slept none. We drove from Boulder in silence, the highway wet with overnight rain, the Rockies hidden behind a ceiling of gray clouds. She wore a black sweater and jeans, no jewelry, her hair pulled back the same way Nina wore hers, a coincidence that felt like something more. The DA assigned to the case was a woman named Patricia Voss, mid-50s, silver-streaked hair, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She sat behind a conference table stacked with printed copies of Crosby's evidence package, Nina's testimony transcript, and a preliminary forensic report on the storage unit documents. Crosby sat to her left. Nina sat to her right. Oscar stood by the window, watching the street below with the same vigilance he had brought to the ballroom. "Mr. Marsh," Voss said, gesturing to 2 empty chairs. "And you must be Tessa. Please sit down." Tessa sat. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was set. She looked like someone who had decided that falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford. Voss spent the first 30 minutes walking us through the legal landscape. Damien Locke had been charged with 12 counts: wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, blackmail, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and obstruction of justice across 3 states. The Denver charges alone carried a potential sentence of 25 years. Federal prosecutors in Portland and Salt Lake City were preparing additional indictments based on the storage unit evidence and Nina's testimony. Ryan Beckett's case in Tucson is being expedited for review. Voss continued. His attorney filed an emergency motion last night based on the Livestream evidence. If the court finds merit, which, given what we now have, is virtually certain, Mr. C's, Beckett could be released within 60 days. Nina closed her eyes when she heard that. Just for a moment. When she opened them, they were wet, but focused. "And my father's case?" Nina asked. "Thomas Callahan, Portland, 2019. Voss removed her glasses. "Miss Callahan, your father's conviction will be reviewed posthumously. It won't bring him back. But the record can be corrected, and his name can be cleared. I've spoken with the Multnomah County DA, and they are prepared to cooperate." Nina nodded once, her lips pressed together. 7 years. 7 years of grief, guilt, and a nonprofit built from the rubble of a destroyed family. And now, finally, the possibility that her father's name would be separated from the lie that killed him. "What about Corinne?" Tessa asked. The room stiffened. Voss turned to my daughter with the careful expression of a prosecutor who understood that legal answers and human answers are rarely the same thing. "Your mother was questioned for 4 hours last night. She has retained an attorney, Gerald Huang, defense counsel. Her formal statement acknowledges a relationship with Damien Locke, spanning 14 months, but characterizes her involvement as coerced." "Coerced," Tessa repeated. The words sat in her mouth like something bitter. "Her attorney claims that Damien Locke manipulated your mother through psychological pressure and threats. The DA's office is evaluating that claim against the evidence, specifically the storage unit file describing her as a willing participant and the phone records showing consistent voluntary contact over 14 months. "What's the likely outcome?" I asked. Voss paused, weighing transparency against caution. If the evidence supports the coercion claim, your wife may receive a reduced charge accessory after the fact, probation, mandatory counseling. If the evidence contradicts her statement, she faces conspiracy charges carrying up to 8 years. 8 years. The same sentence Thomas Callahan had received. The symmetry was brutal. The meeting lasted 2 more hours. Crosby presented the technical evidence, the facial recognition grid, the AutoCAD timestamp analysis, the linguistic comparison between Damien's letter and his coded emails. Nina delivered her testimony in person, steady and precise, answering every question Voss posed with the clarity of someone who had rehearsed this moment for 7 years without knowing when it would arrive. I testified last. I described Oscar's call, the workshop discovery, the motel research, the Portland trip, Philip's confession in Pueblo, the storage unit breach, and the ceremony. I described finding the file on Corinne. I described reading the words "willing participant" on a concrete floor at midnight and understanding that the person lying beside me for 23 years had been lying in a different sense entirely. When we left the courthouse at 1:15 p.m., the February sun had broken through the clouds. Denver looked sharp and clean in the winter light glass towers reflecting sky. The mountains visible again behind the city, like a spine behind a body. Tessa stood on the courthouse steps and took a breath that seemed to expand her entire frame. "I'm not going back to school this week," she said. "I called my advisor this morning. He understands." "Tessa, your exhibition can wait. My family can't." 3 weeks passed. The legal machinery ground forward with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a construction project managed by bureaucrats. Damien Locke was denied bail flight risk, multiple aliases, evidence of passport fraud. His public defender requested a psychiatric evaluation, which the court granted. The evaluation concluded that Damien exhibited traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder and an obsessive fixation on the architecture profession rooted in childhood trauma. The report used the word revenge 14 times. Corinne's case resolved on March 4th. Her attorney negotiated a plea agreement accessory to fraud, 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory psychological counseling. The DA accepted the deal because Corinne provided testimony corroborating the timeline of Damien's Denver operation, including details about how he had contacted her through a charity event at the Denver Art Museum, the same type of event, where he had first approached Lorraine Callahan in Portland. The pattern was a circle, and my wife had walked into it the same way every other wife had. I signed the divorce papers on March 7th. Corinne didn't contest anything. The house, the assets, the retirement accounts. She took nothing except her personal belongings and her car. She moved to a rental apartment in Littleton. I didn't ask for the address. Ryan Beckett was released from the Arizona State Prison Complex on March 12th. His wife Margaret met him at the gate. Nina texted me a photograph, a man in a wrinkled shirt squinting in the Tucson sun, holding a woman who was holding him like the ground might open if she let go. I saved the photograph in a folder on my phone labeled Foundations. Thomas Callahan's conviction was vacated on March 18th, posthumously. His daughter was notified by phone. She didn't call me that day. She called the next morning, and all she said was, "His name is clean. Thank you, Elliot." Summer arrived in Denver the way it always does, slowly at first. Then all at once, the brown hillsides turning green overnight, the air shifting from sharp to soft, the mountains shedding their snow, like old buildings shedding scaffolding after renovation. By June, the city felt like a different place. Or maybe I was the one who was different. I sold the house on a Thursday in late May. The buyers were a young couple, both engineers, expecting their first child. They walked through the rooms with the wide-eyed reverence of people who saw potential in every corner. They didn't know about the workshop. They didn't know about the crawl space. They didn't know that the garden had once grown lavender, planted by a woman who had watered it every morning while planning her husband's destruction. I didn't tell them. Some foundations are better left uninspected. Oscar helped me move. He arrived at 7 a.m. with his truck, his thermos, and the same frayed canvas jacket he had worn for a decade. We carried boxes in silence, books, drafting tools, photographs I hadn't decided whether to keep. When the last box was loaded, Oscar stood in the empty living room and looked around with an expression I couldn't immediately read. 17 years, he said. 17 years, I repeated. He extended his hand. I shook it. Then he pulled me into a hug brief. Firm. The kind of embrace that structural engineers would approve of. No wasted material. Maximum load capacity. What will you do? I asked. My cousin has a construction company in Fort Collins. He's been asking me to manage his properties for 2 years. Oscar paused. And I've been thinking about going back to school, finishing the degree I started in Bogotá. Civil engineering. You should. You're paying for it. I laughed, the first real laugh in months, the kind that catches you off guard and reminds you that certain structures survive even when everything around them collapses. Deal. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Wash Park, South Denver. The building was nothing remarkable, 1960s, brick, flat roof, iron railings. The kind of architecture that prioritizes function over poetry. But the windows faced west toward the mountains, and in the evenings the sunset painted the Rockies in shades of copper and gold that no rendering software could replicate. I set up a small drafting table by the window and began sketching again. Not commissions, not commercial projects, just lines on paper. The pure geometry of imagining something that doesn't exist yet and believing it could. Tessa visited every weekend. She had returned to Boulder after missing 1 week of classes, and her adaptive reuse proposal for the flour mill had won the departmental exhibition. Her advisor called it structurally innovative and emotionally intelligent. I hung the award certificate on my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a protractor. We didn't talk about Corinne often. When we did, Tessa spoke about her mother, with a measured distance that I recognized as self-preservation. The careful spacing between load-bearing elements that prevents one failure from cascading into another. She visited Corinne once, in April, at the Littleton apartment. She told me afterward that Corinne had looked smaller, quieter, like a building with its lights turned off. She said they drank tea and talked about the garden. She asked about you. Tessa said, "What did you tell her? That you're okay. That you're drawing again." Nina Callahan returned to Portland after the DA meeting, but came back to Denver twice, once for a deposition in March, once in May, for a conference on wrongful convictions where she was the keynote speaker. We had dinner the second time at a restaurant on Larimer Street, 2 blocks from the coffee shop where I used to order the drink Damien had cataloged in his 43-page dossier. Rising Foundations received 300 applications for legal aid in the past 2 months, Nina told me over pasta. The live stream changed everything. People are coming forward not just from Damien's cases, but from similar patterns across the country. Financial fraud disguised as domestic betrayal. Planted evidence. Coerced testimony. You're building something important. I'm building what my father would have built if he'd been given the chance. She set down her fork. Elliot, I've been thinking about something. The storage unit. The 5 filing cabinets. Portland. Salt Lake City. Tucson. Boise. Denver. 5 cities. 5 operations. 5 families destroyed. But Damien was 25 when the Portland operation started. What was he doing between 19 and 25? The question opened a door I hadn't considered. 6 years unaccounted for. 6 years between Philip's imprisonment and the first known operation. What had Damien been building during those years? Who had taught him the skills, the forgery, the social engineering, the financial architecture of fraud? I don't know, I said. But I think Crosby should look into it. Already asked him. He's running searches on Damien's movements from 2012 to 2017. If there are earlier victims we don't know about, they deserve the same chance Ryan Beckett got. I nodded. The architecture of Damien's destruction might have more floors than we had mapped. But that was work for investigators and prosecutors and women like Nina, who had turned their grief into a foundation strong enough to support others. My work was different now. Damien's trial was scheduled for September. His attorneys had filed multiple motions: change of venue, suppression of evidence, challenges to the storage unit search. The legal process would be long, complex, and exhausting, but the evidence was overwhelming. And the public record, 41,000 people had watched the live stream. And the archived video had accumulated over 2 million views, made disappearance impossible. Damien Locke's architecture of destruction was fully exposed, every beam and joint visible, every flaw documented. On a Saturday evening in June, I sat at my drafting table and watched the sun descend behind the Rockies. The apartment was quiet. Tessa's last text glowed on my phone. "See you tomorrow. Bringing bagels and my new sketches. Love you, Dad." On the table beside my pencils lay 3 items. Oscar's thermos cap he had accidentally left behind, Nina's business card for Rising Foundations, and a photograph of the Aspen Resort observation deck at sunset. My best work, the cantilever extending into open air, supported by invisible engineering, holding weight that seemed impossible. I picked up my pencil and began to draw. Not a building, not a blueprint, just a line, clean, deliberate, extending across white paper towards something I couldn't see yet, but trusted was there. Every architect knows this feeling, the moment before the design reveals itself. When the page is empty and the pencil is sharp, and the only foundation you need is the belief that what you're building is worth the weight it will carry. My name is Elliot Marsh. I am 53 years old. I have been betrayed by my wife, targeted by a predator, and saved by a groundskeeper, a hacker, and the daughter of a dead man. I have lost a house, a marriage, and a version of myself that I will never recover. But I have kept my daughter, my name, and the only skill that has never failed me, the ability to look at empty ground and see something worth building. The sun disappeared behind the mountains. The room went gold, then amber, then quiet blue. I kept drawing. Some foundations crack, some hold. And some, the ones you build after everything else has fallen, are the strongest structures you will ever design.